Hey, it's Tammy M here of TammyMCoaching.com, empowerment life coach and creator of the Freedom Class. And what I want to talk to you about today is healthy adult narcissism. Now, before I begin this video, I just want to quickly announce that we have a few spots available in the calendar this week for the free one-to-one consult with either myself or a member of my team for the Freedom Class program. So be sure to stick around till the end of the video for the announcement on how to enroll and sign up for that consult. Now, with that, let's get started. So what exactly is healthy adult narcissism? Well, the term healthy narcissism is actually a concept in psychology. And truth be told, it's a concept that some psychologists agree with and some don't. The term itself can be triggering because the words healthy and narcissism seem to be a contradiction in terms on face value. But the thing to know is that narcissism, in its pure definition, doesn't necessarily equate to narcissistic abuse, which is why I personally use the term destructive narcissism when I'm discussing these issues. I think it's more accurate. Now, first of all, it's important to understand when we're discussing these issues, there is a continuum, a spectrum to what is a destructive narcissist pattern. And that continuum, that spectrum evolves right into what a doctor could diagnose potentially as a narcissistic personality disorder, all the way to antisocial personality disorders, psychopathy, sociopathy, etc. So there's a continuum, a spectrum. So someone may or may not land on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. So the difference between a narcissistic personality disordered person and a person who has a destructive narcissist pattern, there's a difference there. Now, what that fundamentally boils down to is one is a diagnosed condition by a psychiatrist or, a doctor, and the other is not. You don't have to be a psychiatrist. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a clinician to determine whether or not the person that's causing you harm and distress in your life lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. There's certainly enough information out there on the internet based on your personal experience for you to put together whether or not you're dealing with someone, again, who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. But it takes a doctor, a psychiatrist, to diagnose an individual with a personality disorder, narcissistic personality being one of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, the Big Five. Narcissistic personality disorder is one of the Big Five. The fact that you are dealing with someone who has not been diagnosed, which in my opinion is most of them, by virtue of what they have, these folks are walking around undiagnosed all over the place, right? By virtue of what they have, they are not putting their hand up for help. They certainly aren't the issue. Therefore, often, probably more often than not, these folks go undiagnosed. So that's a whole other conversation, but it's important to understand this sort of foundational stuff if we're going to put together what the hell is healthy adult narcissism, because narcissism is such a big buzzword right now and it gets thrown around a lot where people don't really understand the implications of putting that label on someone. So a destructive narcissist pattern has nothing to do with a formal diagnosis by a doctor. What it is a cluster of attitudes and behaviors that someone exhibits, right? They're going through life with a cluster of attitudes and behaviors that are reflective of a destructive narcissist pattern. It looks like a lack in empathy, a lack in conscience, a irrational sense of entitlement, egotistical delusions of grandeur, selfish and self-centered to the extreme, a tendency to project their own unresolved issues, their own trauma, their own attitudes and behaviors that they can't acknowledge, own, accept, cop to, project all of that stuff onto the nearest target, right? So on the spectrum of destructive narcissism, long before we get into the realm of a personality disorder diagnosis, we'll leave that to, the helping profession who are qualified to do that, right? That's another conversation. But long before we get to that place, there are behaviors that we can observe and confirm based on our own personal experience with an individual or individuals that can tell us whether or not we are likely dealing with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. So it's important to understand that that is the spectrum of destructive narcissism. And what does that have to do with healthy narcissism? How does healthy narcissism come into play? Well, it's important to understand that there is such a thing as age-appropriate narcissism. And many would agree, myself included, healthy narcissism. For example, it's perfectly appropriate for a child to be completely self-absorbed, right? Maybe even a little self-obsessed, grandiose, have an entitled attitude. We don't question whether or not that's appropriate for an infant, a baby, or a toddler. That's absolutely appropriate. But the issue is when an adult has not developed healthy adult narcissism, has not developed emotionally, in other words, what happens is they tend to think, feel, and act, and even have subconscious feelings and act out, not always consciously, often subconsciously, in ways that are far more reflective of an infant, a toddler, or an adolescent. In fact, you're probably often dealing with a very angry and frustrated baby located in an adult's body when you're having these really difficult interactions with someone who lands on the spectrum of destructive narcissism. So the thing to understand is that narcissism, in its pure definition, does not necessarily equate to destructive narcissism, narcissistic abuse, or even malignant or pathological narcissism, right? Again, there is such a thing as healthy adult narcissism. In fact, in my opinion, Dr. Craig Malcolm, I don't know if you can see that there, in his book, Rethinking Narcissism, does an excellent job at just doing a deep dive, going into the difference between healthy adult narcissism and what would be considered destructive narcissism or a destructive narcissist pattern, right? And, the way he describes it is, destructive narcissism really boils down to an addiction to feeling special. And I personally think there's a whole lot more to it. I'm sure he would agree there's a whole lot more to it, but, from his perspective, to be as succinct as possible, that's what it boils down to. When it comes to healthy adult narcissism, what it really means is that you have a healthy sense of self and self-esteem. You are not, playing this game of one-upmanship your whole life, right? Like going through life with this need to prop yourself up with a false sense of superiority. You do not have an irrational sense of entitlement. You have a healthy sense of humility instead. You're neither one up or one down. You can be the generative source of self-love from within yourself, understanding where you end and I begin, reasonable, healthy boundaries and limits. You understand and respect the rights of others and have no need or desire to exploit others, to diminish others, to demean others, to target others. You do not take any sick pleasure or get a sick kick or hit out of harming others, putting others down, that sort of thing, right? When you have healthy adult narcissism, you're going through life in a way that is productive and healthy for yourself and others who are exposed to you. When you have a destructive narcissist pattern, you're going through life in a way that is very unhealthy and destructive for yourself and in particular for those who are exposed to you. So just understand, as this word, narcissism and narcissist gets thrown around so much, so liberally in our society, in our culture, there is, in my opinion, and the opinion of many experts out there, such a thing as healthy adult narcissism. And it fundamentally boils down to having the capacity to love yourself in a way that is not harmful to yourself or anyone else. Like, if I had to really boil it down, right, to the crux of the matter, can I love myself in a healthy way, see myself in a healthy, realistic way that is productive for myself and certainly not harmful to anyone else? In fact, if anything, the more we love ourselves, the more we carry higher and higher vibrations of love, the more we literally bring that to the world. And anyone who is, involved in any area of our lives gets to benefit from that. So it's a tricky conversation and subject because, again, like I said at the top of the video, healthy and narcissism seem to be an oxymoron. Like, they don't really go together, but understand that there is such a thing as, having developed this healthy sense of self and healthy self-esteem. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And that can really serve you really well in your life. And it has nothing to do with being selfish and self-centered to the extreme to where you're harming yourself and others. My friends, I hope you found that helpful. If you liked what you heard, remember to give me a like, drop a comment, and let me know what your biggest takeaway was. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Happy to have you with us. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to be notified when I post new videos throughout the week. And as I said at the beginning of the video, we do have some spots available in the calendar this week for the free one-to-one consult with either myself or a member of my team for the Freedom Class program. So if that's of interest to you, there is a link in the description below where you can apply to see if you qualify for a free one-on-one consultation with us. And with that, I'm going to call it a wrap. As always, I will leave you with this. Know your value, and unlock your freedom. Much love. Bye for now.